God created the sky, the land, and the sea in 6 days, and then he invited his images, his idols, to rule with him over his cosmic temple. But instead of depending on God's definition of good, the original humans decided that they knew better than God, and therefore they were expelled east of the garden, and this just led to a downward spiral of murder and chaos and decreation. But God intervened in this history of human fallenness by choosing one man and his family and entering into a covenant with them to be their God and promising them great promises. Now, this covenant is introduced to us in chapter 12. Let's take a look at the Abrahamic covenant in chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. The Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great. Now, take a look at this. This is a direct comparison, a contrast to all those who gathered in Babel, and they said, let us make a name for ourselves to display our greatness. But instead, God is going to take a no name, and he's going to make him into a great name, and he's going to bless him and bless all those who bless him, so that in him all the families of the earth will be blessed. Somehow, this one man and his family is going to be the vehicle and the conduit of blessing to all the families and all the nations of the earth. Now, this first expression of the covenant here in chapter 12 is going to raise several categories of blessing, which would be valuable for us to flag now, because these blessing categories are going to be picked up and developed throughout the rest of the book of Genesis. Take a look at this document on the Abrahamic covenant. Here in chapter 12, I have the verses on the right. Abraham is promised land. Go from your country to the land that I will show you. He's promised offspring. I will make of you a great nation. And he's promised blessing. I will bless you, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. However, almost immediately, Abraham is going to place all of these great blessings and promises in jeopardy. And therefore, we're calling this little section in orange, we're calling this the threats to the promise section. There's a couple of them, and that's because, as you have probably noticed, the Abraham narrative is arranged as a careful chiasm. And you remember what a chiasm is, of course. We have the outer frames which match one another, and there's an inner frame that matches all the way down, oftentimes into a center, which here is the promise of the seed. So after on the outside, the outer frame and the brackets of this chiasm is a couple of genealogies starting with Terah, and inside of that we have two commands for Abraham to go. Go from Ur of the Chaldees to the land I will show you. Go to the mountain of Moriah and there sacrifice your son Isaac on an altar. And then we have these threat sections, and then Lot is going to need to be rescued a couple of times. And let's take a look at these two moments, because they have some unique parallels between them, which really, I think, demonstrate the chiasm here in the Abraham cycle in chapters 12 through 25. So here is the rescue of Lot section in green, this thing that we're applying the letter D to. And notice how it starts off here in chapter 14 with a war, with a battle between 4 kings of the east and 5 kings of Canaan. And one of those kings of Canaan is the king of Sodom, and Lot is taken off captive. Abraham has to go and rescue him, and when he comes back, he's greeted by this strange character, Melchizedek, who consequently is king number 10. We have 9 kings at war, and then here comes king number 10, who blesses Abraham, and Abraham gives him a 10th. Now notice how this sequence maps on precisely to chapters 18 and 19 here in the parallel section of the chiasm, where Lot is in trouble again because he lives in Sodom, and God is going to destroy Sodom. So just like Abraham intervenes militarily in chapter 14. So he's doing so spiritually, you may say, in chapter 18, where he's interceding with Yahweh, pleading with him to spare. Would you spare Sodom if there's 50 righteous people? What if there's 45? What if there's 40, 30, 20, 10? He gets down to 10 righteous people, just like Melchizedek is the king of righteousness as king number 10. Now, isn't that a fascinating connection here? Now, in this case, Sodom is not rescued, as the king of Sodom is here in chapter 14. Rather, Sodom is destroyed, but Lot is rescued from that destruction. And then here at the center of the chiasm, we have a return on the focus of the promise of the seed, where after it was initially introduced to us in chapter 12, here in chapter 15, the covenant is ratified. Yahweh ratifies his covenant with Abram. And then in chapter 17, we're given the sign of the covenant, and that sign is circumcision. But I want to turn our attention to these threats to the promise section, because these threats, they are really the primary drama of the Abraham narrative, where God is going to make these great promises to Abraham, but Abraham, through his folly and through his lack of faith, is going to put these promises in jeopardy. However, these promises are going to be recovered by God through his grace, and then afterwards, Abraham is going to receive even greater blessing after these threat episodes, which kind of is similar to a big theme in the book of Genesis, highlighted most strongly here in 37 to 50, where God turns man's evil into good. And we'll see that in each of these cases as well. Well, there is no better example of Abraham's folly and threat to the promise than his mistreatment of his poor wife, Sarah, or she's formerly called Sarai. Twice, 2 times, 1-2, Abraham finds himself in what he believes to be hostile Gentile territory, and he feels threatened by the beauty of his wife. Sarah is a really beautiful lady, and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm surrounded by all these pagan Gentiles. When they see how beautiful my wife is, they're going to kill me and take her to be their wife. So here's my plan. All right, Sarah, call yourself my sister, so that when they see you and your relationship to me, they will court my favor, so that I will give you to them. It'll be great. They'll give me all kinds of blessings. It'll be fantastic. That's my plan. That's wisdom according to me. Well, of course, this goes horribly wrong, and Sarah is taken into the harem, first of Pharaoh in chapter 12, and then of Abimelech in chapter 20. Now, why is this such a big problem? It's a huge problem, because what if Sarah is impregnated by Pharaoh? That's the line of the snake. You can't have the line of the snake and the line of the serpent interweaving like that. And so God is going to step in and resolve this problem that Abraham got himself into. Let's look at these threats to the promise, which are overcome. Threats to the promise. So 2 times here in blue, we have this. Sarah is taken into a foreign harem problem. And the first time, Yahweh is going to afflict Pharaoh, king of Egypt, with plagues, so that Pharaoh says, take her and go. That's kind of interesting. I wonder if that's ever happened before or will happen in the future. And then, in the case of Abimelech, God is going to appear to him in a dream and say, you're a dead man, let this woman go. Well, in each case, this folly of Abraham, after it is overcome, leads to blessing. And let's see, where should I go next? However, Abraham is not off the hook. He's clearly shown a lack of faith and folly, but notice how these narratives portray his role in the story. It's not a very positive one. So we alluded to it a minute ago. God is going to send plagues on Pharaoh so that Abraham can go up from Egypt back to the land of promise. This is just like the book of Exodus. But this time, it's not because of Pharaoh's deception, like in the book of Exodus, that the plagues are sent on Egypt. Rather, it's because of Abraham's deception that these plagues are sent on Egypt. And then look in the case of Abimelech. Take a look at this. Look at the specific language that's used in the dream where Yahweh appears to Abraham, or appears to Abimelech. And he's going to say, this is Genesis 3 language here, he's going to say to Abimelech, return this man's wife. If you do not return her, you will surely die. The same kind of language that we have here, the threat that if they eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they will surely die. That's what Abimelech is threatened with because he took Sarah. Well, in this case, Sarah becomes the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Abimelech becomes Adam, who wants to take from the tree, and Abraham becomes the snake who's effectively tempting Abimelech to do so. This is crazy. This is the person that Abraham, or that God has chosen to bless all the nations. It's this guy doing this ridiculous thing. Well, clearly it's not for his merit that he is chosen out from the nations. Well, not only is Abraham going to endanger the seed promise, he's going to endanger the land promise as well. So immediately after he's given this promise in the beginning of chapter 12, the very first thing he does is leave the land. He's promised the land, and then he goes and he leaves the land. He turns his back on it because of a famine. In chapter 12, verse 10, there's a famine in the land, and he doesn't trust God to take care of him. Rather, he leaves the land which he is promised. And after plagues are sent on Egypt and he returns to the land, he nearly gives away the land again to Lot. Look at this episode in chapter 13. Another threat to the promise moment where there's contention between Lot's shepherds and Abram's shepherds. So Abraham, makes the noble offer, and he says, all right, Lot, this is what we'll do. You look, all the land is before us. If you take the left, I'll take the right. Or if you take the right, I'll go to the left. And what could have happened? Lot could have chosen the promised land and forced Abraham out of it. But in the providence of God, Lot is going to choose for himself the land of Sodom. Lot chose for himself the Jordan Valley, and Abraham was fortunately able to settle and to stay in the land of Sodom. Now, in so doing, Lot making this choice, he is repeating again that sin, that original sin there in the Garden of Eden. And look how he does it. Lot is going to, this is in chapter 13, lift up his eyes and see that the land of Sodom is good, and therefore he's going to take that land for himself, just like the woman saw that the fruit was good and she took it. Now notice that this land of Sodom is like the garden of the Lord. I mean, you couldn't be any more explicit than this. Lot is repeating the sins of Eve. And then, of course, where is the direction of Sodom? It is to the east. And so he leaves this garden area to the east. Well, God is going to turn this threat, we already said he's going to turn this threat into promise, and specifically the promise is of the land. Here it is in chapter 13. This is after Lot had separated from Abram. God tells to Abraham, lift up your eyes, look everywhere, to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west. All of this land I will give to you and your offspring forever, and I will make your offspring as multiple and as many as the dust of the earth. Well, the next obstacle, the next threat to the promise isn't necessarily Abraham's folly or his lack of faith. It's just his age. The guy's old. He was 75 years old, remember, when he went from Haran to the land of Canaan. And we're already told at that point that his wife Sarai is barren, and she still is. So the problem here, the threat to the promise, is his childlessness. And this becomes a faith struggle for Abraham here in chapter 15. Notice how it's a faith struggle. Take a look at this. where Abraham is going to say, this is what I'm calling the alternative heir section. He's going to say, oh, Lord, what shall I do? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus. He's my servant. My servant is my heir. And God is going to respond by saying, no, your own son, your own son is going to be your heir, Abraham. So God reaffirms that promise. And Abraham's next faith failure, that was chapter 15. Now we're in chapter 16. And this is the episode of Hagar, where he is going to listen to his wife. Abraham is going to listen to his wife, Sarah, and take Hagar for himself in an attempt to obtain blessing by his own wisdom instead of relying on the blessing and the goodness that will come from God alone. Of course, what is he doing there? He's repeating the sins of Adam. We're just playing this tape on repeat throughout the whole book of Genesis. Let's see the specific language which is repeated here in this episode in chapter 16, where Sarai is going to say to Abram, take my servant Hagar, and maybe we can get a child through her. So Abraham, look at this, listened to the voice of Sarah, and Sarai took Hagar and gave her to Abraham. Look how this exact same thing happened in Genesis chapter 3, where Adam listened to the voice of his wife, and Eve took of the fruit and gave to her husband. Same language is utilized. And of course, after they did that, their eyes were open. They realized they're naked. And what does Abraham do? He went into Hagar. So of course, we have the same problem here. But in the same way, God is going to overcome this threat. So that was chapter 16. Where the alternative heir is no longer Eleazar the servant. Now the alternative heir is Ishmael. And maybe we can get a child by through Hagar. And Abraham even pleads with God, that Ishmael may live before you. May he be my heir. But God is going to say again, he's going to be explicit. No, your heir will be your son, and your heir will be Sarah's son. Sarah, your wife, will bear a son by this time next year. And then, of course, this threat, which is overcome, results in even greater blessing here in chapter 17. Where, let's see. And this blessing, which is promised here in 17, is another affirmation of the covenant. In chapter 15, the covenant was ratified. Now in chapter 17, the covenant is given a sign. The sign of the covenant between me and you will be circumcision. God is going to command Abraham to mark that part of the human male anatomy which is responsible for producing blessing, for producing offspring, in order to remind him and all of his descendants that blessing is going to come not as a result of their own effort and work, but from God alone. For he's going to say, no, I will make you into nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful. I will give you a son by Sarah. Well, let's return, however, to that covenant ratification ceremony in chapter 15, because there's a lot of interesting and important things happening here. So Abraham is given some rather strange instructions. He's told to gather a whole bunch of animals, get some sheep and some oxen, and cut them in half. Get a big old hacksaw, cut those animals in half, separate them to create an aisle in between these two halves of these animals so that we can walk through the middle of that aisle. What is going on here? We got animals cut in half, bloody mess everywhere. We're supposed to walk in between them. Well, the only other passage in the entire Hebrew Bible that gives us a clue as to what is happening in this covenant ratification ceremony in chapter 15 is in Jeremiah chapter 34. And this is, I believe it's in the days of Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, and there's some rich landowners, and they promise to release their slaves. Every 7 years, they're supposed to release their slaves. Well, nobody ever did that. And they promised, no, we're going to do it. We're going to release our slaves. And they enter into a covenant promising to do that. But then, of course, they break their word and they take their slaves back. Well, this passage in Jeremiah 34 shows us the process of how that covenant was made and the consequences for breaking that covenant. Let's go now to Jeremiah 34. So we got to figure out what's happening in Genesis 15. Jeremiah 34, verses 18. And then the men who transgressed my covenant, they didn't keep the terms of my covenant. What's their consequences? I'm going to make those men like the calf that they cut in two and passed between the parts. These officials, all these covenant breakers, all the people of the land who passed through the parts of the calves, I will make them like that calf that was cut in half. So it seems like the logic of this covenant is that if either party of the covenant were to break that covenant, they will become like the animals which are broken in half. Now this is huge. Take a minute, press the pause button here. Abraham did not pass through the animals. Abraham did not pass through the animals. Let's see, who did? If Abraham didn't, who did? So we have this instruction for him to get a heifer and a female goat, a ram, all these birds, cut them in half so we can pass between them. But a deep sleep is going to fall on Abraham, darkness, dreadful darkness. And when it was dark, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch is going to pass between the pieces. But Abraham is not. And on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham. So what is going on here? Obviously, those two fiery like emblems, symbols, that's God himself who is shrouded in cloud and fire. He is the only one to pass through these animals and enter and solidify, ratify this covenant. And in so doing, God is alone claiming responsibility for both maintaining the covenant, and he will on himself bear the consequences for the failure of that covenant. He only. So of course, Abraham and his family, they're going to fail as covenant partners again and again and again. But who's going to pay for that failure to be a covenant partner? God is going to pay for that failure. And how is he going to do that? Well, we're given a picture of that blessing producing self-sacrifice here in chapter 22. It's amazing. So the good old Apostle Paul, he is going to call Abraham the father of those who have faith. And this faith of Abraham is exemplified here in chapter 22, where after all the threats to the promise are overcome, Sarah gives birth to Isaac in chapter 21. And the very next chapter, chapter 22, opens with these words, God tested Abraham, and he said to him, take your son, your only son, whom you love, and go to the mountains of Moriah, and there offer him as a burnt offering and a sacrifice to me. And what's he going to do? Well, just like in chapter 15, where Abraham believed the Lord, and that belief was counted to him as righteousness, so Abraham is going to obey the Lord in faith, though it doesn't make any sense to him, reasoning most likely that God was able to raise Isaac from the dead. That's what we learned from the book of Hebrews 11, by the way. And this radical faith of Abraham and this test which is overcome leads to blessing. But my question is, why was this even necessary? Why did God have to test Abraham in this way? And specifically, why this test to sacrifice his firstborn? Well, this is a bit of speculation, but could it be that a substitutionary sacrifice was necessary to atone for the sins of Abraham? And you may ask, well, what sin are you talking about? Well, it seems from the literary design of this section of Genesis that the sin of Abraham is his abuse of his servant Hagar. You see, just before this test, in chapter 22, in chapter 21, both Hagar and her son Ishmael are banished. They're kicked out. They're said, I'm sorry, guys, you got to go. Here's some water. Good luck to you. And they're sent off into the wilderness. And there are all kinds of literary parallels between the banishment of Ishmael and the binding of Isaac. Take a look at how these two stories are intertwined. It's fascinating. So the binding and the banishment. So Abraham in chapter 22, the binding of Isaac, he's going to rise early in the morning and take with him a few things. Just like in chapter 21, Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water. And then Abraham is going to take the wood for the burnt offering and he's going to lay it on Isaac. Just like in the chapter before, Abraham took a skin of water and he laid it on Hagar, put it on her shoulder. And then as he ascends the mountain of Moriah, he's going to take Isaac and he's going to put Isaac on top of wood. Just like Hagar, when she goes out into the wilderness, she's going to take her son Ishmael and she's going to put him under wood, that is under bushes. And Abraham's going to reach up the knife into the air to slaughter his son. And Hagar's going to say, "Oh, let me not look on the death of my son." And then right at that moment, an angel of the Lord calls to him from heaven, just like an angel of God calls to Hagar from heaven, and causes Abraham to lift up his eyes and see a ram that's caught in the thicket. And so he went and sacrificed the ram. And God opened the eyes of Hagar, and she saw a well of water. And she goes to the well of water, and she gives to her son a drink. And then there's a promise of blessing. I will multiply your offspring. And Ishmael is going to have great offspring as well. He's promised a great nation, and all of this is set in and around the region of Beersheba. I mean, these parallels are everywhere. So what are they teaching us? Well, this is important, in order for the blessings of Eden to be released, we need a substitutionary sacrifice to be offered on the mountains of Jerusalem. Yes, Jerusalem. Mount Moriah, where Abraham bound Isaac. The only other time that mountain is referenced in the entire Bible is in 2 Chronicles 3, verse 1, which is where Solomon builds the temple, there on the mountain of Moriah in Jerusalem. So the Abraham story is designed to present the need for something to happen in Jerusalem so that the blessings of Eden can be released and our sins can be covered over. Now, these blessings of Eden, the only Eden land that Abraham ever owns is a burial cave where he buries his wife Sarah. He's promised the land, but all he's ever given is a cave to bury his wife in. That's all he ever personally receives. However, despite that meager reception of the promise, we are given many little hints of Eden, foretastes of Eden throughout the Abraham narrative. These are moments when God is going to personally meet with man in a garden, on a mountain where there is peace with the nations and blessing and abundance flows forth. So take a look at this. These are cool moments. Another neat motif taking place in the book of Genesis. So Abraham is going to constantly be building altars before the Lord on top of mountains and next to trees. These are Eden-like trees, the oak of Moreh, the oaks of Mamre. He's going to be planting a tamarisk tree. Where he buys the cave of Machpelah, that place is surrounded by trees. There's all these trees in the field. And these are places where God meets with man. The Lord appeared to Abraham there by the oaks of Mamre. The Lord appeared to him later by the oaks of Mamre here in chapter 18. Now, the final resting place of both Sarah and Abraham, the caves of Machpelah, they kind of give us a clever anticipation of our return to the garden. To take a look at how they do this. The cave of Machpelah is really the cave of the naked couple. Let me show you how this worked. The cave of the naked couple, okay. So Machpelah, it has as its root here the word kafal, which means to double. It means like a pair of things or a couple. And the word cave is it's spelled with the same letters as the word naked. You just take the M here at the beginning of the word, and you just throw it to the end, and then you got the word naked. So this is the cave of the naked pair or the naked double, the naked couple. Now, just like Adam and Eve were the first naked couple inside of a garden. So Abraham and Sarah are going to bring us back to the garden, and they're going to do so through the seed of the woman, who will be a son of Abraham and a son of Isaac and a son of Jacob, who we will look at in chapters 25 to 36 next.